I kept quiet when they sold my late mother's ring until I found out where the money really went. I was folding my uniform when my brother called and told me they sold Mom's ring. His voice cracked on the word sold like it was something sharp caught in his throat. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bunk, the pressed fabric still warm in my hands, and I didn't say anything for a long time. I just listened to him breathe, 3 states away carrying news that should have broken me. But it didn't. Something inside me went very still, very quiet, the way it does before a storm makes landfall. The ring wasn't valuable by most standards. A modest sapphire, slightly clouded with age, set in white gold that had worn thin on one side from decades of daily wear. My mother used to twist it when she was thinking, a habit so familiar I could picture her hands more clearly than her face some days. She promised it to me when I was 12, not in writing, not formally, just sitting on the back porch while fireflies blinked in the yard. "This will be yours some day," she'd said, "when you find someone worth keeping, or when you just want to remember me." I never forgot. Apparently, everyone else did. My mother passed when I was 19, just before I enlisted. Ovarian cancer, stage 4 by the time anyone thought to look. She went quickly, which the doctors called a mercy and I called theft. 1 month, she was complaining about bloating and fatigue. The next, she was gone, leaving behind closets full of clothes that still smelled like her perfume and a family that didn't know how to function without her gravity holding us together. My father remarried within 2 years. Her name was Diane, and she smiled too much. That was my first impression, how relentlessly she smiled, even at funerals, even when someone was crying. She smiled when she rearranged my mother's kitchen. She smiled when she donated my mother's books to a thrift store without asking. She smiled when she told me the guest room, my childhood bedroom, was being converted into her craft studio. "We need to move forward," she'd say, smiling. "Holding on to the past isn't healthy." I was stationed overseas by then, finishing my first deployment, watching my childhood home transform through video calls into something I no longer recognized. The wallpaper my mother had chosen, gone. The garden she'd planted, paved over for a hot tub. The photographs on the mantel, quietly migrated to a box in the garage. I told myself it was grief. I told myself my father was processing loss the only way he knew how. I told myself that objects weren't the same as memories, that I could carry my mother with me in ways that didn't require physical proof. I was wrong about all of it. My brother Ryan was the one who stayed close, not emotionally close to our father. That door had been slowly closing for years, but geographically close. He lived 40 minutes away, worked construction, showed up for Sunday dinners because someone had to witness what was happening and remember it accurately. He called me every few weeks with updates delivered in a flat voice that told me more than his words ever did. "Diane redecorated the living room again. Dad bought a new truck. Leased, I think. They're talking about a cruise, 2 weeks in the Mediterranean." I listened without comment. I was learning even then that silence was its own form of documentation. The call about the ring came on a Thursday evening, my time, early morning his. I was between shifts, exhausted in a way that had settled into my bones like sediment. Ryan didn't bother with small talk. "They sold Mom's ring," he said, "the sapphire. I saw it on Diane's Facebook, a post about decluttering sentimental items that no longer serve them. She tagged some estate jewelry buyer in the comments." I closed my eyes. How much? She didn't say. Did Dad know? A pause. Then quieter. He was standing right behind her when she posted it. I sat with that image for a long time. My father, watching his second wife sell his first wife's ring, the ring that had been promised to his daughter, and saying nothing, doing nothing. Are you okay? Ryan asked. No, I said honestly, but I will be. I didn't cry. I didn't call my father in a rage. I didn't post anything online or send accusatory messages. Instead, I opened a new document on my laptop and typed the date, the time, and everything Ryan had told me. The military teaches you many things: discipline, endurance, how to function on 4 hours of sleep and cold coffee. But the most valuable lesson, the one that has saved me more times than I can count, is this: document everything. Emotions fade, records don't. That night, I started building a file. I didn't confront my father about the ring. I knew how that conversation would go, the same way every difficult conversation with him had gone since my mother died. He'd get defensive. Diane would insert herself, playing peacekeeper while subtly reframing the narrative. I'd be painted as the angry daughter, the one who couldn't let go, the one who made everything difficult. So instead, I watched. I listened. I asked questions that sounded casual but weren't. How are things financially? I'd ask during our monthly calls. Dad mentioned the truck was giving him trouble. Did he get it fixed? Diane would answer for him, always. Oh, we're fine. You know your father, always worrying about nothing. We've actually been doing quite well, making smart investments. Investments. That word started appearing more and more. Diane talked about investment opportunities, investment potential, investment portfolios. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had watched a few YouTube videos and decided she understood economics. My father, who had worked the same factory job for 30 years and kept his savings in a checking account because he didn't trust banks, suddenly had opinions about market trends and passive income streams. I noted it all. The pattern became clearer the longer I watched. Diane would mention a financial goal, something vague like building security or preparing for the future. Then, within weeks, another piece of my mother's life would vanish. She was converting memories into cash, but the cash never seemed to appear in any form I could verify. I started researching, late nights in my quarters, laptop balanced on my knees, learning about elder financial abuse, about spousal rights, about what constitutes fraud versus what's just poor judgment. I wasn't looking for ammunition yet. I was looking for understanding. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I could know what to do about it. My father called less often. When he did, his voice sounded thinner, more uncertain. He'd start sentences and trail off halfway through. He'd ask me questions, then forget he'd asked them. At first I thought it was age, the natural softening of a man in his late 60s. Then I realized Diane was always there, always in the background, always ready to finish his thoughts for him. Isolation, I learned, is the first tool of manipulation. You don't have to lock someone in a room. You just have to make sure you're the only voice they hear. I documented that too. 6 months after the ring was sold, Ryan called again. "Something's wrong," he said without preamble. "I went over for dinner last night. The house feels different, empty, like things are missing, but I can't figure out what." Missing how? The china cabinets cleared out. Mom's crystal, the stuff she got from Grandma. And the paintings in the hallway, the ones she bought on their anniversary trip, they're gone. I exhaled slowly. Did you ask about it? Diane said they're simplifying, minimizing. She made it sound like a lifestyle choice, like Marie Kondo, but for heirlooms. I pulled up my file and added the date, the items, Diane's explanation. Ryan, I said carefully, I need you to do something for me. Don't react to anything. Don't argue with them. Just watch and tell me everything you see. He was quiet for a moment. You think something's actually wrong. I think Diane is selling everything that isn't nailed down, and I think Dad is either complicit or clueless. Either way, I need to know where the money's going before I can do anything about it. From that point on, Ryan became my eyes on the ground. He reported back weekly, sometimes more often. The grandfather clock was gone. The silver flatware, sold at an estate sale, Diane organized herself. The antique dresser from my parents' bedroom, listed on Facebook Marketplace. Each item vanished into the same black hole, and each time Diane had a reasonable explanation. We're downsizing emotionally, she told Ryan with that relentless smile. Your mother's memory lives in your hearts, not in objects. I wrote it all down. I cross-referenced dates with social media posts, with bank records Ryan managed to glimpse, with anything tangible I could find. The picture that emerged was troubling, but incomplete. Then Diane made a mistake. It happened because Diane forgot which lies she'd told to whom. That's usually how these things unravel, not through grand revelations, but through small inconsistencies that multiply until the weight of them becomes impossible to ignore. My father had a mild heart episode 8 months after the ring was sold. Nothing critical, but enough to require a hospital stay and follow-up appointments. I requested emergency leave and flew home for the first time in over a year. The house was unrecognizable, not just redecorated, stripped. The living room held a couch, a television, and bare walls. The kitchen had been gutted of anything decorative, no canisters, no magnets on the refrigerator, no fruit bowl on the counter. It looked like a model home, staged for sale. I walked through the room slowly, cataloging what was missing. The grandfather clock that had stood in the hallway since before I was born, gone. The bookshelf where my mother kept her collection of first editions, empty and pushed against a different wall. The window seat where she used to read in the afternoon light, the cushions removed, the space converted into storage for Diane's craft supplies. Every room held ghosts of what had been there. I could see the outlines on the walls where pictures had hung, slightly lighter rectangles marking where my mother's taste had once lived. The carpet showed indentations from furniture that no longer existed. Even the air smelled different. Synthetic air freshener, instead of the lavender sachets my mother had kept in every drawer. Diane greeted me with her smile firmly in place. We've been simplifying, she said before I could comment. It's been so freeing. I didn't argue. I just noted it in my head, adding it to the running tally of things that had been erased. My father sat in his recliner, thinner than I remembered, a blanket across his lap despite the warm weather. He looked up when I entered, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or apology. Then it was gone. "Hey, kiddo," he said. "Didn't need to come all this way." "Yes," I replied. "I did." That first night, I lay in the guest room, the room that had once been mine, and listened to the house settle. The sounds were wrong. different floors, different weight distribution. The creaks I'd memorized as a child had been replaced by new ones I didn't recognize. I thought about my mother, about how she'd moved through these spaces, about the way she'd known where every item belonged because she'd chosen it herself. She'd built this home with intention. Diane was dismantling it with efficiency. I stayed for 5 days. I helped with meal preparation, drove my father to his cardiology appointments, and spent every spare moment quietly investigating. I checked the mail before Diane could intercept it. I noticed which drawers she kept locked. I listened to phone calls she thought I couldn't hear. On the third day, I found the bank statements. Diane had left her purse on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. Inside was a folded envelope from a financial institution I didn't recognize. I photographed every page with my phone, hand steady, heart pounding, then replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. Back in my rental car that night, I spread the photographs across my phone screen and started making sense of what I'd found. The statements told a story Diane hadn't meant to share. Large deposits, irregular intervals, amounts that roughly corresponded to the items Ryan had reported sold. The sapphire ring had brought in $3,400. The crystal collection, another $2,800. The paintings, sold individually over 3 months, totaled nearly $6,000. My mother's lifetime of treasures reduced to line items on a bank statement. But the deposits weren't the real story. The withdrawals were. Every few weeks, sometimes more often, large sums moved out of the account. Wire transfers, always to the same destination. An account listed under a name I didn't recognize. The amounts varied, but they were significant. $2,000 here, $5,000 there. Over the past year alone, nearly $40,000 had vanished into that account. $40,000 of my mother's memory sent to a stranger. That night, I sat in my rental car outside my father's house and searched that name. It took less than 10 minutes to find him. Marcus Webb, Diane's son from her first marriage, a man who had never been mentioned in any of our family conversations. He had a criminal record, mostly financial, fraud, and forgery, a bankruptcy filing from 3 years prior, and a recent address in a state I'd never heard Diane reference. The money wasn't being invested. It wasn't being saved. It was being funneled to a son my father didn't know existed through the systematic liquidation of my mother's belongings. I drove to Ryan's apartment that night and showed him everything. He stared at the phone screen for a long time, scrolling through the images. When he looked up, his face was hard. "What do we do?" he asked. "First," I said, "we get Dad's name on a fraud alert, then we talk to a lawyer, then we wait for the right moment." "You're not going to confront her?" I shook my head. "Not yet. She needs to think she's winning. People who think they're winning get careless." Ryan exhaled. "When did you get so cold?" I didn't have a good answer for that. Maybe when they sold Mom's ring. Maybe long before. The legal consultation was sobering. Elder financial abuse is hard to prove when the elder doesn't admit they're being abused. My father was technically competent, capable of making his own financial decisions, even if those decisions were being manipulated by someone who'd earned his trust through calculated kindness. "You need evidence that she's acting against his wishes," the attorney told me, "or evidence that she's deceived him about material facts. Right now, what you have is suggestive but not conclusive." "She's been hiding the existence of her son," I said. That's not material. It might be. It depends on whether your father knew about him when they married. If he did and simply chose not to tell you, that's his right. I left that office feeling smaller than when I'd entered. The law, I was learning, wasn't designed for situations like mine. It protected property, not memories. It recognized fraud in dollar amounts, not in broken promises. My mother's ring wasn't legally mine. It had belonged to my father, and my father had married someone who convinced him it was better gone. But I wasn't defeated. I was recalibrating. "What would you need," I asked the attorney before I left, "to make this conclusive?" She studied me for a moment, assessing. Proof that she actively concealed material information. Proof that she's diverting marital assets without your father's informed consent. Documentation of a pattern, and ideally, something that shows intent. How much documentation? The more the better. Dates, amounts, statements she's made that contradict reality. If you can show a systematic pattern of deception, that changes the calculus significantly. I nodded slowly. I had the beginnings of a pattern. I just needed to keep building it. I returned to base with the file growing thicker and my options still narrow. But I had time. The military was teaching me patience in ways I hadn't expected. Deployments, training rotations, the endless hurry up and wait of bureaucratic processes. I learned to endure. I learned to outlast. The documentation became a discipline of its own. Every Sunday night, I'd update my file. I'd review what Ryan had reported, cross-reference it against what I could find online, and add my analysis. I created timelines. I built spreadsheets. I tracked Diane's social media posts and matched them against the items that disappeared. She was careless on Facebook. She posted photos of redecorated rooms without realizing she was documenting the absence of my mother's things. She checked in at antique shops and estate sales. She tagged the jewelry buyer who'd purchased the ring. Every post was a data point, and I collected them all. Over the next year, I collected evidence the way some people collect stamps. Every item sold, documented. Every suspicious deposit tracked. Every lie Diane told that contradicted a previous lie, recorded with timestamps and context. Ryan kept watching. He reported that Diane had started talking about selling the house. "Just kicking around ideas," she called it. "The market is so good right now. We could buy something smaller, maybe in Arizona. Somewhere warm." Arizona, where Marcus Webb had recently relocated. The house had been my parents' home for 32 years. My mother had planted the garden, chosen the paint colors, measured my height against the doorframe of the basement stairs. Every inch of it held her memory, and Diane wanted to sell it, cash it out, and follow her hidden son to the desert. That was when I requested a meeting with my commanding officer and explained in carefully neutral language that I needed to take extended leave to address a family situation. "Define situation," she said. I told her, not everything, but enough. The financial irregularities, the suspected exploitation, the need to be present before irreversible decisions were made. She listened without interrupting, then nodded slowly. "Family is important," she said. "Handle what you need to handle, but document everything." I almost smiled. "Already am, ma'am." I flew home 3 days before Thanksgiving. The timing was deliberate. Family holidays force gatherings, create witnesses, make it harder for narratives to be quietly rewritten after the fact. Diane had planned an elaborate dinner, inviting neighbors and church friends. people who could be counted on to see her as a gracious hostess and me as the distant daughter who rarely visited. She wasn't wrong about the second part. I had been distant. I had chosen distance because closeness required more pretending than I could sustain. But I was done being distant now. I arrived early before the other guests, while Diane was still arranging flowers and my father was napping in his recliner. Ryan met me at the door with a look I recognized. "She's been weird all week," he murmured, "nervous, snapping at Dad about little things. She knows something's off. She just doesn't know what." I helped set the table, complimented Diane's centerpiece, answered her questions about military life with practiced vagueness. I was pleasant. I was agreeable. I gave her nothing to push against. The guests arrived in clusters, bearing wine bottles and covered dishes. Conversation flowed easily. Stories about the neighborhood, complaints about the weather, the comfortable small talk of people who'd known each other for years. Halfway through the meal, Diane raised her glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she said, her smile radiant. "Family isn't just blood. It's the people we choose. And I'm so grateful we've chosen each other." She looked at me as she said it, a challenge disguised as warmth. I raised my glass. "To family," I agreed, "and to Mom, who brought us all together in the first place." Diane's smile flickered just for a moment. My father's fork paused above his plate. The neighbors murmured agreement, oblivious to the current running beneath the surface. After dinner, while Diane was occupied with dessert preparation and the guests were lingering over coffee, I approached my father in the living room. "Can we talk privately?" I asked. He looked up at me with tired eyes. "What about? Mom's ring?" His expression shifted, something defensive settling into place. That was Diane's call. She thought it was time to let go. "Did you know where the money went?" He frowned. "What money?" "From the ring, and the china, and the paintings, and everything else she's sold over the past 2 years. My father's mouth opened, closed. "That money went into savings. Diane said, Diane has been sending it to her son." Silence. My father stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "She doesn't have a son." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photographs, the bank statements, the account in Marcus Webb's name, the public records connecting him to Diane, the timeline showing deposits and withdrawals. My father's hands trembled as he scrolled through the images, his face aged 10 years in 30 seconds. "I didn't know," he whispered. "She never told me." "I know. She said the money was for our future, for retirement, for Arizona." "Arizona is where Marcus lives. She was planning to take you there, close to him, away from us." He looked up at me, eyes wet. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I took a breath. "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You needed to see it yourself." From the kitchen, I heard Diane's voice calling guests to the dessert table. My father wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and stood up slowly. "What do I do?" he asked. And for the first time in years, he sounded like my father again. Lost, but present. "You let me handle it," I said, "but you need to be there when I do." Dessert was served, coffee poured. The conversation drifted into comfortable territory. Holidays passed, plans for the new year. Diane presided over it all, refilling glasses, offering seconds, performing generosity with practiced ease. I waited until the lull, that natural pause when people are full and content, before I spoke. "Diane," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I have a question about some financial matters." She looked at me, smile still in place but eyes sharpening. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" "I was wondering about the proceeds from Mom's ring and the crystal and the antique furniture. I've been trying to understand the family finances, and I noticed some irregularities." The room went quiet. Neighbors exchanged glances. Ryan leaned forward slightly in his chair. "I'm not sure what you mean," Diane said carefully. "All of that was handled appropriately." "Was it?" "Because the bank records show deposits going to an account I don't recognize, under the name Marcus Webb." Diane's face went pale. She set down her coffee cup with a click. "I don't know anyone by that name." I pulled the folder from my bag, the one I'd assembled over 2 years of patient documentation. "Marcus Webb is your son from your first marriage. He has a criminal record for financial fraud. He filed for bankruptcy in 2019, and he's been receiving regular deposits from your account, deposits that correspond almost exactly to the items you've sold from this house." I laid the documents on the table, one by one. Bank statements, public records, the timeline, the photographs, everything clear and undeniable. "This is the ring," I said, pointing to a line item. "Sold to Brighton Estate Jewelry for $3,400. This is the crystal collection. This is the grandfather clock. This is Mom's writing desk." I turned to another page. "And this is where the money went. $47,000 over 18 months, wired to an account in Marcus Webb's name. Your son. The one you never mentioned. The one with 2 fraud convictions and a bankruptcy that you've been funding with my mother's belongings." The room was completely silent. Even the neighbors who hadn't yet escaped were frozen, witnessing something they'd never expected to see at a holiday dinner. Diane's mouth worked, but no sound came out. She looked at my father, who sat with his head bowed, unable to meet her eyes. "David," she said sharply, "tell them this is a misunderstanding." My father raised his head slowly. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did you lie to me about the money, about having a son?" "It's complicated," Diane said, her voice rising. "Marcus has had a hard life. He needed help. I was going to tell you—" "When?" My father's voice cracked. "When were you going to tell me you'd been selling my dead wife's belongings to fund your son's lifestyle?" The neighbors were frozen, caught in a private drama they hadn't signed up for. One of them quietly stood and murmured something about giving us privacy. Others followed, collecting coats and dishes, escaping with apologetic glances. Within 5 minutes, the house was empty, except for family. Diane turned on me then, the smile finally gone. "You planned this," she hissed. "You've been waiting for this moment." "Yes," I agreed, "I have." "You think you're so clever, so righteous. You don't know what I've sacrificed for this family." "I know exactly what you've sacrificed," I replied. "Mom's ring, her jewelry, her furniture, her memories. You sacrificed all of it, and you didn't even have the decency to tell the truth about where it went." She grabbed her purse from the counter. "I don't have to listen to this. David, we're leaving." My father didn't move. "David." "No," he said quietly. "I think I'm going to stay." Diane stared at him, calculation flickering behind her eyes. For a moment, I thought she might argue, might try one more manipulation. Instead, she turned and walked out the front door without another word. Her car started in the driveway. The headlights swept across the windows as she backed out. And then she was gone. The aftermath was complicated, as these things always are. Legal proceedings took months. Diane contested everything, painted herself as the victim of a vindictive stepdaughter. But documents don't lie, and I had 2 years of them. The court granted my father an annulment based on fraud, the marriage voided on the grounds that Diane had concealed material facts, specifically the existence of her son and the diversion of marital assets. Some of the money was recovered, not all, but enough to matter. Marcus Webb was also investigated. The transfers from my father's accounts, funneled through his mother, constituted wire fraud. He pleaded to lesser charges to avoid trial, adding another conviction to his record. Diane wasn't charged criminally. Her attorneys argued she believed she had the right to manage marital property as she saw fit. But the civil judgment against her was substantial. She moved to Arizona anyway to be near her son. Some people don't change. They just relocate. The ring was gone, sold to a buyer who'd resold it somewhere untraceable. That still hurts. Some losses don't have remedies. But I stopped thinking of the ring as the point. The ring was a symbol. What Diane tried to take was bigger than sapphires and white gold. She tried to take my mother's place in my father's memory, to erase her piece by piece until nothing remained. She failed. My father and I didn't repair things overnight. Trust doesn't work that way, especially when it's been eroded from multiple directions. But we started talking, really talking, for the first time since Mom died. He told me things he'd never said before, how lost he'd felt after she passed, how much he'd wanted someone to make decisions for him, someone to take away the weight of being alone. He said Diane had seemed like an answer, and by the time he realized she was a different kind of problem, he didn't know how to get out. "I should have listened to you," he said one afternoon, sitting in the living room we were slowly restoring. "I should have asked more questions." "You didn't know what questions to ask," I replied. "That's how people like Diane operate. They make you feel like asking questions is the problem." He nodded slowly. We were both learning. He apologized for not protecting her belongings. I apologized for not coming home sooner. Neither apology was enough, but they were beginnings. Ryan and I grew closer than we'd been since childhood. He stopped being just my source of information and became something more solid, a witness, a partner, a reminder that family could mean loyalty instead of loss. He came to visit me on base a few months after everything settled. We sat in the common area, drinking bad coffee from the vending machine, not saying much. The silence was comfortable in a way it hadn't been when we were kids, always competing for attention, always trying to figure out our place in a family that didn't quite have room for both of us. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't figured it out," he said eventually. "If you'd just let it go like I would have." "You wouldn't have let it go." "I might have. I didn't have the training you have, the patience." He shook his head. "I would have confronted her the first week, would have made a scene, given her something to work with. She'd have twisted it around, made me the bad guy." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you would have found another way." "No." He looked at me, something like admiration in his eyes. "This was your way. You made it work. You made it right." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just clinked my paper cup against his. "We both made it work," I said. "I couldn't have done it without your reports, without you staying close enough to see what was happening." "Staying close was the easy part," he said. "Staying quiet was harder." I understood that perfectly. I returned to duty with something settled in my chest that hadn't been there before. not peace exactly. Resolution is a better word. The knowledge that I'd done what needed to be done in the way it needed to be done without losing myself in the process. The house was restored over time. Ryan helped our father repaint the rooms Diane had changed. They found some of my mother's things at local consignment shops, bought them back at a premium. The china cabinet was refilled, piece by piece, with new memories alongside salvaged ones. And on the mantel, in the spot where my mother's photographs had once sat before Diane boxed them away, there's now a framed picture of all four of us. Mom, Dad, Ryan, and me, taken at my high school graduation years before cancer, before Diane, before any of this. She's wearing the ring in that photo. You can see it if you look closely. The sapphire catching the light, slightly clouded, worn thin on one side, a promise she made to me on a summer evening while fireflies blinked in the yard. I never got the ring back, but I kept the promise. I protected what mattered, and I learned that sometimes the things we lose make space for the things we become. 6 months later, I was promoted. At the ceremony, I wore my dress uniform and stood straight under the lights while the words were read and the insignia was pinned. Afterward, my commanding officer shook my hand and said something that stayed with me. "You handled that family situation with discipline," she said. "Most people would have acted on emotion. You acted on evidence." I thought about my mother, about her ring, about the fireflies blinking in the yard while she made me a promise she trusted me to keep. "I learned from the best," I said. "All of them." If you're listening to this and something resonated, if you've ever watched someone dismantle a legacy one piece at a time while you stood helpless, I want you to know something. You're not powerless. You're just waiting for the right moment. Patience isn't passive. Documentation isn't obsession. And protecting what matters isn't the same as holding on to the past. Sometimes it's the only way to make sure the past has a future. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to gather evidence before you could act? Did you find strength in the waiting? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. We share stories like this every day here at Her Service, Her Story. Stories about patience, protection, and what happens when someone underestimates the quiet ones. If you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe and stay with us. Let's keep walking this path together.